Yeah, good morning, dear students. Today, let us discuss Russian formalism. Okay, to study Roman Jakobson's linguistics and poetics, we should first know what is formalism, and after that, we should know what is semiotics. Okay, so Russian formalism was a moment of literary criticism and interpretation. Russian formalism was a movement of literary criticism and interpretation. It was begun in 1920s and later suppressed by the Soviets in 1930s. Okay, so a movement of literary criticism and interpretation. Okay, though it has the span of 10 years, its influences are permanent. Roman Jakobson was a leading linguistic theoretician. Roman Jakobson was a leading linguistic theoretician of the moment. And Victor Slavsky was a major literary theoretician. Roman Jakobson was a leading linguistic theoretician of the moment, and the Victor Slavsky was a major literary theoretician. The major works that launched and popularized the formalist. The major works that launched and popularized the formalist or Russian formalist include Osip Brik, O-S-I-P-B-R-I-K, Osip Brik, and Victor Slavsky's poetics. Victor Slavsky's poetics in 1990, and Jakobson's modern Russian poetry in 1921. Jakobson's modern Russian poetry in 1921. And the later works like Vladimir's morphology of the folk tale in 1928. These are the works which influenced or which launched and popularized the Russian formalism, right? So the Russian school of formalism attempted to investigate. The Russian school of formalism attempted to investigate how language works in literature. Okay, so the Russian school of formalism, this school of formalism attempted to investigate how language works. Okay, they tried to know how language works in literature, because the ordinary language is different from the literary language. It's very clear. But how this ordinary language works in literature and took the shape of, or takes the shape of, this literary language. Okay, and how literary text and literary traditions function as systems. Even they wanted to identify, they wanted to find or investigate how literary texts and literary traditions function as systems. Okay, so even they functions as systems, because even the literature is also considered as one of the science systems, one of the science systems, right? So the formalists believed in certain key assumptions. The formalists believed in certain key assumptions. Let us see what are they. Literature, especially poetry, was a special function of language. Okay, the literature was a special function of language. Okay, this language which has a special function, or which was used to convey or to fulfill a special function. That is the result of literature. Yeah, that led to the that resulted in literature. That resulted in literature. So literature was a special function of language. In this literature, yeah, this is almost a metaphorical statement, we can say. Literature was a special function of language. If you want to say about literature, it is not a expression of life. It is not expression of life in terms of truth and beauty. It is not like that. They simply says that literature was a special function of language. If the language is specially function, then that is literature. Then that is literature, right? It was possible to discover the underlying formulae. It was possible to discover the underlying formulae or structures of literary texts by a study of its devices. They believe that there is underlying formula or structures in literary text. Okay, if we consider the literature as the function of a special function of language, then it is possible to discover the underlying formulae or structures of literary text by studying by a study of its devices, by studying the devices of literature, right? So literary analysis could be as accurate and precise as science. Okay, literary analysis could be as accurate and precise as science. Okay, what we follow, how we analyze, and how the discourse may be in general sciences, in other sciences. In the same manner, this literary analysis could be as accurate and precise as other sciences are, right? So Roman Jakobson insisted that literature is possessed of certain elements. Literature is possessed of certain elements or linguistic characteristics, which gives it a special specificity. Okay, what is his idea? He says that literature is possessed of certain elements or linguistic characteristics. Okay, so within the literature, there are certain elements or linguistic characteristics, which gives it a specificity. Those linguistic elements or linguistic characteristics will make the literature a special. Okay, there is such specificity in literature. Okay, apart from ordinary language, apart from ordinary usage of language. Okay, so this specificity is the proposal given by Roman Jakobson. He proposed that So Russian formalist tried. So now this Russian formalist, they tried to isolate this specificity. They wanted to separate from all other combinations. They wanted to separate this specificity from all other ambiguous combinations, ambiguous concepts. Okay, among which the specificity of this language was lost. So Russian formalists tried to isolate this specificity and consider it under the name of literariness. Okay, even this Roman Jakobson and other formalists, they consider it under the name of literariness. They attributed a word to this specificity, that is literariness. They termed or they called this specificity as a literariness, right? So now, as they tried to isolate this specificity, we can say the purpose of this criticism was to find out how a literary text generated or possessed a literary text, a literariness, has this specificity which differentiates or which distinguish this this literary language from ordinary language. That is called literariness. Now, the purpose of this criticism was to find out how a literary text generated or possessed a literariness. Okay, they wanted to know how that literary text possessed or generated literariness. That is the purpose of this criticism. Literariness was a special use of everyday language. Of course, literary language was nowhere brought from. Okay, literary language is the language used, what we use in our day-to-day language. But this literariness was a special use of everyday language. But by using the ordinary language in a special way, we can attain this literariness. It was the effect of the formal and the linguistic properties of a text. It is the effect. This literariness was the effect of formal and the linguistic properties of a text. Every text has its own formal and linguistic properties. Okay, so literariness was a special use of everyday language. It was the effect of the formal and the linguistic properties of a text, right? So next point, literary and poetic language transformed everyday objects into something else. This literary and poetic language transformed everyday objects into something else. By using words about the objects differently. By using the words about the objects differently. Okay, from the rose, instead of expressing the rose, okay, in the literature, by using the everyday object, the object which we can see, which may be the real, Okay, then we can transform that object into the symbol of love, the symbol of love. Okay, in that rose, in that rose, okay, the people or the literary men could see the love or a pure love, what we can say, or the expression of love. Likewise, from the everyday objects, okay, this literary and poetic language transforms everyday objects into something else by using words. Okay, about words about the objects differently, about the objects different. Okay, some literary men could see the beauty in the rose, but some people could see the thorns behind that rose. Okay, they implied that even behind the love, true love, there may be some thorns, or there may be some difficulties, there may be some pains, we can say, right? So, a literary text represents the world. A literary text represents the world in such a way that ordinary things appear different. In that literary world, in that literary text, the world is represented. In the literary text, the world is represented in such a way that ordinary things appear different. Ordinary things appear different. That is the greatness of literature. Even the ordinary things can be presented differently in the literature. Okay, the world, here the word was used, the world, because everything may be under this literature. This literature can cover everything in this world. There is no exemption for it. Okay, so this process is what Slavsky termed defamiliarization. Defamiliarization, making the familiar words strange, presenting the familiar words in a strange manner. That process is called defamiliarization. Defamiliarization, right? So, dear students, here in this process, there is a Russian formalist, especially Slavsky, termed this process as defamiliarization. Defamiliarization, right? So the poetic language has certain features. The poetic language has certain features that make it different from ordinary or everyday language. Okay, this poetic language has certain features which distinguish or which differentiate or which make it different from ordinary or everyday language, right? So the formalist, by focusing on what makes a text literary, they wanted to study what makes a text literary. Okay, the text on sound waves, or the text on matrix, or the text on chemical bonding may not be considered as a literary text. Okay, now here, these formalists, by focusing on what makes a text literary, they clearly negotiated the relation between literary and non-literary texts, the relation between literary and non-literary texts, right? So they focused on literariness of the text and what makes a literary text literary. What makes a text a literary text? By focusing on that, this formalist clearly negotiated the relationship between literary and non-literary text. They could be able to distinguish exactly what is the difference between literary and non-literary text, right? Since all literature is in the form of language, What is literature? It is a form of language. That's it. Okay, a specially used form of language. That's it. To convey some images and ideas by following some mechanisms, by using some devices, literary devices, right? Since all literature is in the form of language, there is a strong connection. There is a strong connection between literariness and language. Okay, since all literature is in the form of language, okay, there is a strong connection between literariness and language. But it is not just ordinary language. It is language plus something. It is something more than the language. Okay, so there is a strong connection between literariness and language. But it is not just ordinary language. It is a literature plus. It is a literature plus. The function of poetic language is not to make extrinsic references. The function of poetic language, see, this is the main turning point in formalist view. The function of poetic language is not to make extrinsic features. Okay, extrinsic references, referring the extraneous objects, referring the outside of the text, referring the objects outside of the text. This is not the function of the poetic language. But to draw attention to its own formal features, especially to the interrelationships between the linguistic science themselves. Okay, so for them, when we read a poem, we need not to find out what are the extraneous features, what are the extraneous references, extrinsic references. Okay, if a crow is used, if a crow is used or the word crow is used, we need not to know all the details of the crow, how it lives and how it survives, what class it belongs to, and how it nurture its children, and how long it may live. These are all unnecessary details. These are all unnecessary details for them. Okay, that word, usage of the word crow is not used to make extrinsic references. Okay, likewise in the poem. Okay, the function of poetic language is to draw attention to its own formal features. Formal features. Okay, formal. Okay, forms. Formal in the sense here, the form of language. How that abstract system of language is there, and what a beauty is there in that abstract system of language, abstract forms of language. Okay, to draw the attention of its own features, especially to the interrelationships between the linguistic science themselves. In the poem, the almost all the words, not almost all the words are science. Okay, now in this, the function of poetic language is to draw the attention towards the relationship, the interrelationship between the linguistic science themselves. How this linguistic science, they have their own relation among themselves. Okay, we have to look into, not we have to look out from the poem. We have to look into outside of the poem. Okay, that's the idea here. Okay, we have to focus on the poem. We have to look into the poem, not we have to come out from the poem to make a sense. We have to find the sense within the poem. We have to find the sense. We have to find the meaning within the poem. That is the sense here. So, poetic language is self-referential and autonomous. Poetic language is self-referential It has its own reference. So, poetic language is self-referential, and autonomous. What makes it self-referential? What does it mean? Okay, to understand the meaning of the poem, we need not to refer the extraneous feature. We have to search. We have to check within the poem. We have to find the meaning of the poem within the poem, meaning of the word within the poem. And moreover, it is autonomous. It is not dependent on any other thing. So poetic language utilizes its material. Poetic language utilizes its material primarily for the purpose of self-directedness. The material is used okay in this poetic language. So poetic language utilizes its material primarily for the purpose of self-directedness. Russian formalism revolutionized literary criticism in the early 20th century. Russian formalism revolutionized literary criticism in the early 20th century.